Picture a time when a single bolt of silk could make a merchant richer than a king, when spices like pepper and cinnamon were worth their weight in silver. When the fate of entire nations swung on the twists and turns of dusty mountain passes and scorching desert trails, this wasn't just commerce, it was power, diplomacy, and destiny woven into the very fabric of history. The Silk Road wasn't just a route, it was the lifeblood of empires, a pulsating network of trade that connected the farthest corners of the known world, from the bustling markets of Chang'an to the marble forums of Rome. But beneath the glitter of gold and silk lay darker truths, betrayals, plagues, and wars that would alter the course of civilization itself. What made this ancient highway so much more than just a path for merchants? How did it become the invisible hand that built towering empires only to crumble them centuries later? The answer lies in the stories of those who walked its paths, the daring caravans braving bandits and blizzards, the diplomats trading secrets along with spices, and the conquerors who saw these routes not as bridges but as weapons. This was a world where a single shipment of silk could spark a rebellion, where a new route discovered by accident could shift the balance of power between East and West. The Silk Road didn't just move goods, it moved history, and today we're retracing those footsteps. We'll unravel how the Silk Road turned nomads into kings, how it spread ideas faster than any army, and how its collapse doomed empires that once seemed eternal. From the hidden oases where deals changed hands under the stars, to the palace intrigues where emperors and khans gambled with the lives of millions, this is a tale of ambition, ingenuity, and the high cost of connection. So settle in, because the history you think you know is about to take a detour down roads less traveled, where every mile holds a secret waiting to rewrite the past. The story of the Silk Road begins not with merchants or maps, but with an emperor's desperate gamble for survival. In the 2nd century before the Common Era, China's Han Dynasty faced a relentless threat from the Xiongnu nomads, horseback warriors who raided with terrifying speed. Emperor Wu needed allies, and he sent a bold courtier named Zhang Qian westward with a simple mission: find distant tribes willing to fight alongside China. What followed was one of history's greatest accidental discoveries. Zhang Qian's 13-year odyssey took him through treacherous mountain passes and into lands no Chinese envoy had ever seen. Though he failed to secure military alliances, he returned with something far more valuable: knowledge of sophisticated civilizations to the West, and the realization that China's precious silk could buy more security than any army. This was the spark that ignited the Silk Road. By the time Zhang Qian made his second journey, caravans were already forming, lured by the extravagant profits of silk, a fabric so coveted that Roman nobles would pay a year's wages for a single robe. But the real magic of these routes wasn't just in the silk threads. It was in everything else that traveled with them. Chinese ironwork revolutionized farming in Persia, while Central Asian horses transformed Chinese cavalry. Glassware from Alexandria astonished courtiers in Chang'an, and Indian spices found their way to Mediterranean kitchens. Even paper, that humble innovation, would trace its path westward along these routes, ultimately changing how the world recorded its history. What made these exchanges possible was an intricate relay system spanning continents. No single merchant traveled the entire route. Instead, goods passed through countless hands in a chain of bustling market cities like Samarkand and Kashgar. At each stop, languages, religions, and technologies mingled. Buddhist monks hitchhiked with merchant caravans, spreading their teachings. Persian astronomers shared star charts with Chinese scholars. This was globalization's first draft, written not by politicians but by traders who cared more for profit than borders. The Silk Road didn't just connect places, it dissolved the very idea of a divided world, proving that even the mightiest empires were just pieces in a far greater puzzle. The wealth of the Silk Road didn't just line the pockets of merchants, it built the very foundations of empires. Take Rome, where the elite's obsession with Chinese silk became so rampant that senators complained it was draining the empire's silver reserves. A single pound of silk could cost as much as a soldier's yearly pay, and the demand was insatiable. Yet for all the gold flowing eastward, Rome gained something even more valuable: access to spices that preserved food, medicines that healed the sick, and luxuries that kept its citizens content. This trade wasn't just about extravagance, it was a lifeline that sustained Rome's dominance for centuries, even as the cost strained its economy to the breaking point. Meanwhile, halfway across the world, China's Tang Dynasty was writing its own chapter in the Silk Road's golden age. The taxes and tariffs from caravan traffic filled imperial coffers, funding grand cities like Chang'an, where foreign traders mingled with poets and scholars. Silk Road wealth bankrolled massive public works, from sprawling canals to towering Buddhist temples. But perhaps most crucially, it paid for the armies that expanded China's borders, securing its place as the undisputed superpower of the East. The Tang didn't just profit from the Silk Road, they weaponized it, using trade as both carrot and stick to influence neighbors and rivals alike. Yet the true masters of Silk Road strategy weren't always the mightiest empires. Smaller kingdoms like the Kushans, ruling from the mountainous crossroads of Central Asia, proved that controlling key trade hubs could elevate even modest realms to greatness. By taxing every camel that passed through their cities, the Kushans amassed fortunes that let them punch far above their weight, minting gold coins stamped with images of their kings alongside Greek, Persian, and Indian gods, a testament to the cultural melting pot they governed. Their capital at Peshawar became a glittering oasis where Greek philosophy debated Buddhist teachings, and Roman glassware sat beside Chinese lacquerware. But this dependence on trade routes was a double-edged sword. When bandits infested the mountain passes or wars choked off supply lines, entire economies trembled. The Sogdians, legendary middlemen of the Silk Road, watched helplessly as political upheavals in China or Persia could ruin their fortunes overnight. Even mighty Rome, when its eastern trade was disrupted, faced bread riots and currency crises. The lesson was clear: these threads of commerce that built empires could also strangle them. And as we'll see, when new routes opened and old ones faded, the balance of power would shift in ways no ruler could predict. Beneath the shimmering silks and glittering treasures of the Silk Road lurked dangers that could topple kingdoms as swiftly as they were built. Imagine a merchant caravan creeping through the Pamir Mountains, each step a gamble against bandits lurking in the cliffs, waiting to descend like wolves upon the unguarded. These weren't just petty thieves, some were entire tribes turned warlord, like the infamous White Huns who strangled trade routes until empires paid them tribute in gold. Even the mightiest caravans traveled armed, their guards scanning every shadowed pass, knowing a single ambush could erase fortunes and lives in moments. But bloodshed wasn't the only threat riding those dusty trails. The Silk Road became an invisible highway for something far deadlier: disease. When Mongol armies catapulted plague-infested corpses over the walls of Kaffa in 1346, they didn't just win a battle, they unleashed the Black Death upon Europe. The same networks that carried spices and perfumes also transported fleas bearing the bubonic plague, weaving a web of death from China to Constantinople. Within years, entire cities lay empty, their populations halved. The lesson was brutal global connections could bring devastation as easily as wealth, turning trade routes into funeral processions. And then there were the silent collapses, no less catastrophic for their lack of drama. When political chaos erupted in Persia or China, entire stretches of the Silk Road withered overnight. The Sogdians, once the master traders of Central Asia, watched their bustling markets turn to ghost towns as wars rerouted caravans elsewhere. Even Rome, at the height of its power, faced economic disaster when Parthian conflicts choked off its eastern trade. Emperors scrambled to find new routes, while merchants hoarded silk like gold, knowing scarcity could bankrupt dynasties. The cruelest irony, the very innovations that made the Silk Road flourish also sowed the seeds of its decline. As shipbuilders perfected ocean-going vessels, the perilous overland routes began to lose their monopoly. Why brave bandits and deserts when Portuguese caravels could sail around Africa, carrying spices by the shipload? By the time the Ottomans seized Constantinople in 1453, blocking the last major overland artery to Europe, the age of camel caravans was already fading. The empires built on Silk Road wealth now found themselves stranded like abandoned waystations, their gloried days as fleeting as the desert winds that once carried their fortunes. Yet perhaps the most enduring legacy of the Silk Road's dark side is its warning that no empire, however grand, is immune to the tides of trade. The same currents that lift kingdoms can drown them, and the threads connecting civilizations are as fragile as they are strong. For every palace built on silk profits, there was a ruin left behind when those threads snapped. The road giveth, and the road taketh away. Marco Polo's name still echoes through history as the ultimate Silk Road adventurer, but behind the romanticized tales lies a far grittier truth. When his stories of Kublai Khan's opulent court reached Europe in the 13th century, they ignited fantasies of exotic lands overflowing with gold and spices. Yet for every Marco Polo who returned to write of his travels, countless merchants vanished without a trace, swallowed by sandstorms in the Taklamakan Desert, frozen in the deathly grip of the Pamir Mountains, or cut down by bandits who left no witnesses. The Silk Road wasn't just a stage for grand adventures. It was a gauntlet where survival itself was a rare triumph. What made Polo's account so extraordinary wasn't just what he described, but what he omitted. His famous writings barely hint at the weeks spent trudging through blistering heat with cracked lips and dwindling water, or the nights listening for the scuff of thieves' feet outside flimsy tents. While he marveled at the Khan's postal system, a network of relay stations that could move messages faster than any European courier, he glossed over the corpses of couriers who'd pushed their horses too hard across unforgiving terrain. The reality was this: for every silk-clad diplomat sipping wine in a Mongol court, there were 100 anonymous travelers whose bones still lie buried beneath the dunes. Yet Polo's legacy isn't just about exaggeration, it's about perspective. To European readers, his tales of paper money and coal-burning furnaces sounded like pure fantasy, revealing how vast the gap between East and West had grown. While Chinese and Persian geographers had mapped these lands for centuries, Polo's account forced Europe to confront its own ignorance. His descriptions of Hangzhou's bustling canals, where 10,000 bridges arched over waterways teeming with trade made medieval Venice look like a provincial backwater. Suddenly, the world felt both larger and more connected, planting seeds for the age of exploration to come. But the greatest irony of Polo's story, he may never have seen half the wonders he described. Scholars still debate whether he actually reached China or simply cobbled together stories from other travelers in smoky caravanserais. Whether fact or fabrication, his account exposed a deeper truth. The Silk Road thrived on myths as much as merchandise. It was a place where rumor could inflate the value of a spice, where a merchant's tall tale might birth a legend, and where the line between explorer and storyteller was as thin as a strand of silk. In the end, Polo's legacy mirrors the Silk Road itself, a tapestry of truth and illusion, where the journey mattered more than the destination, and where the stories that survived tell us as much about the tellers as the world they sought to describe. The most precious cargo traveling the Silk Road wasn't silk or spices, it was ideas. While merchants calculated profits in silver and gold, something far more transformative moved silently along those dusty trails, the exchange of knowledge that would redefine civilizations. Consider the journey of Buddhism, born in India but finding its greatest flourishing in China, carried not by conquering armies but by monks hitchhiking on merchant caravans. By the time the first Buddhist caves were carved at Dunhuang, the religion had absorbed Greek artistic influences from Alexander the Great's old territories, Persian motifs from Zoroastrian traders, and Chinese philosophical traditions, becoming a living testament to the Silk Road's power to blend cultures. Greek science, preserved and expanded by Persian scholars in Baghdad's House of Wisdom, made its way eastward, introducing revolutionary concepts like spherical astronomy to Chinese mathematicians. Meanwhile, Persian blue pigments brightened Chinese porcelain, while Chinese papermaking techniques, a closely guarded secret for centuries, leaked westward, reaching Samarkand by the 8th century and transforming record-keeping from Spain to Syria. The compass, originally a Chinese divination tool, became the navigational backbone of Arab and later European explorers, turning the Mediterranean into a highway for new empires. But perhaps the most explosive transfer was gunpowder. What began as a Taoist alchemist's failed quest for immortality in 9th century China would, centuries later, rattle the walls of Constantinople when Ottoman cannons breached the last bastion of the Roman Empire. The same trade routes that carried healing herbs and delicate calligraphy also delivered the means to destroy, proof that ideas, like goods, could be used or misused by those who received them. The true genius of this intellectual marketplace was its improvisation. When Arab scholars in Baghdad needed to translate Greek texts, they turned to Syriac Christian monks who'd preserved them. When Chinese astronomers puzzled over celestial movements, they borrowed equations from Indian mathematicians who'd refined Greek geometry. This was globalization in its purest form, not imposed by emperors or decrees, but pieced together by thousands of unnamed traders, travelers, and translators who cared less about origins than usefulness. And so the Silk Road's greatest legacy isn't found in museum cases displaying porcelain or coins, but in the invisible threads that still connect us. The decimal system we use today, a gift from India via Arab traders. The stories of 1001 Nights Persian tales filtered through Arabic and shared along caravan routes. Even the citrus fruits in our kitchens originally Southeast Asia, cultivated in Persian orchards, then carried to Mediterranean shores. These ideas didn't just travel, they took root, mutated, and bore fruit in ways no single civilization could have achieved alone. The Silk Road taught humanity a vital lesson, that progress has always been a collaborative act, written in the footnotes of history by those who dared to share what they knew. The empires along the Silk Road may have built the grand cities and collected the tariffs, but the real arbiters of power galloped across the open steppe nomadic tribes who understood the land like no settled ruler ever could. Picture the Xiongnu horsemen, their felt tents rising like mushrooms after rain, disappearing just as fast when imperial armies marched out. These weren't random raiders. They were sophisticated strategists who turned mobility into an unstoppable weapon. When Chinese emperors tried to build walls or send punitive expeditions, the nomads simply melted into the horizon, only to strike where least expected. Their demands were simple: pay us in silk and grain, or watch your caravans vanish into the dust. What made these tribes so formidable wasn't just their skill with a bow, it was their intimate knowledge of the Silk Road's invisible geography. While merchants clung to established routes, nomads navigated secret mountain passes and hidden water sources, allowing them to ambush or bypass choke points at will. The Sogdians, those legendary traders, learned the hard way that no caravan was safe unless the local nomadic chieftain had been paid his protection fee. Even Rome, at the height of its power, found itself sending annual bribes, euphemistically called gifts, to Parthian horse lords to keep its eastern trade flowing. Then came the Mongols, who transformed this system of extortion into an empire. Under Genghis Khan, the nomads stopped merely taxing the Silk Road, they took ownership of it. His revolutionary idea turned the entire trade network into a protected highway under one authority. Mongol patrols eradicated bandits, standardized weights and measures, and even introduced a primitive passport system for merchants. For the first time, a trader could travel from Beijing to Baghdad without fear of robbery, provided he paid the Khan's taxes. The result was a trade boom that made the previous centuries look like a backyard market. But the nomads' greatest power lay in their unpredictability. A tribe that had been loyal for generations might suddenly switch sides if a better offer came, like the Uyghurs, who abandoned the Tang Dynasty for the Tibetans when war disrupted their grazing lands. Or consider the Khazars, who famously converted to Judaism not for spiritual reasons, but to maintain neutrality between Christian Byzantium and Muslim Persia, ensuring their position as indispensable middlemen. These weren't just tactical decisions, they were masterclasses in geopolitical chess, played by people whom city dwellers dismissively called barbarians. The cruelest irony, the very empires that scorned nomads as uncivilized became utterly dependent on them. Chinese dynasties hired Turkic mercenaries to guard their western frontiers, only to watch those same warriors seize power during rebellions. Persian shahs married their daughters to tribal chiefs, hoping to buy loyalty until those sons-in-law became rival claimants to the throne. Even the mighty Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad relied on Turkish slave soldiers who eventually reduced the caliphs to figureheads. The lesson was clear: you could build walls of stone or walls of gold, but neither could withstand the relentless pressure of those who refused to be walled in. In the end, the nomad's legacy isn't just one of conquest. It's a reminder that real power often lies with those who control the spaces between. While kings squabbled over cities and tariffs, the horsemen of the steppe held the keys to the routes that connected them all. Their story whispers a timeless truth. Sometimes the most powerful people aren't those who build the roads, but those who decide who gets to walk them. The great unraveling of the Silk Road began not with a dramatic collapse, but with a slow turning away, like a river changing course grain by grain. By the 15th century, the world was pivoting toward the oceans, where Portuguese caravels and Spanish galleons could carry cargoes that would take 1,000 camels to transport. Vasco da Gama's voyage around Africa's Cape of Good Hope in 1498 didn't just open a new route to India. It sounded the death knell for the overland trade that had sustained empires for millennia. Suddenly, spices from the east could bypass the Ottoman-controlled choke points that had bled European treasuries dry. Venice, once the glittering gateway between east and west, watched its warehouses empty as Lisbon's docks overflowed. China's Ming Dynasty made a fateful miscalculation during this shift. After Admiral Zheng He's legendary treasure fleets had sailed as far as East Africa in the early 15th century, the emperors abruptly turned inward. They dismantled their navy, banned private overseas trade, and rebuilt the Great Wall, as if barricading themselves against the very winds of change. The decision might have felt like strength, but it was economic suicide. While European ships circled the globe, China's once thriving ports at Quanzhou and Guangzhou grew quiet. The silver that had flowed in from Silk Road trade dwindled, starving the Ming of the currency that greased their bureaucratic machinery. Within centuries, they'd be overwhelmed by internal rebellions and Manchu invasions, a cautionary tale of what happens when empires cling to fading routes while the world moves on. Meanwhile, the Ottomans, who had mastered the art of taxing overland trade, became victims of their own success. By controlling Constantinople and the Levant, they could charge exorbitant fees for goods passing between Asia and Europe. But their grip was too tight. European kingdoms, desperate to circumvent these costs, redoubled efforts to find sea routes. When the Portuguese began unloading pepper directly into Lisbon's harbors, the Ottoman sultans found their once lucrative position as middlemen rendered obsolete. Their solution doubled down on control, further strangling the dwindling caravans. It was a death spiral. The more they taxed, the more traders fled to the seas, and the more the Ottomans taxed to compensate. The final irony lay in the deserts themselves. As the last caravans grew scarce, the very infrastructure that had sustained the Silk Road began to consume it. Oasis towns that had thrived on servicing travelers saw their water systems decay without maintenance. Bandits, once kept in check by the protection fees of robust trade, now preyed mercilessly on the few remaining merchants. The great caravanserais, those bustling way stations where languages and religions had mingled, slowly crumbled into the sands, their courtyards silent but for the scuttle of lizards across cold hearths. Yet the Silk Road's true lesson isn't about endings, it's about adaptation. Some traders pivoted to coastal markets, becoming the ancestors of today's global shipping magnates. Others, like the Armenians, built new overland networks connecting Safavid Persia to Mughal India. Even the humble camel caravans never fully vanished. They simply retreated to niches where ships couldn't reach, like the tea-horse roads threading through the Himalayas. The world didn't abandon connection. It found cheaper, faster ways to achieve it. And that's the unspoken epilogue to this saga. The fall of the Silk Road wasn't the death of trade, but the birth of something even more transformative, a world where no empire could monopolize the routes of exchange ever again. The Silk Road story doesn't end with crumbling caravanserais or fading trade routes. It echoes in the very bones of our modern world. Those ancient threads of connection, spun across deserts and mountains, wove the first blueprint of globalization long before the word existed. Think about the last time you sipped tea from India, admired porcelain from China, or traced the intricate patterns of a Persian rug. Each carries whispers of that vast network where goods weren't just traded, but cultures collided and merged, leaving fingerprints on everything from art to astronomy. The Silk Road taught humanity a radical idea, that no civilization thrives in isolation, and progress is always a collaboration written in many languages. Look at today's supply chains, digital descendants of those camel caravans where a single ship delay in Shanghai can empty supermarket shelves in Chicago. The same vulnerabilities that toppled empires still haunt us. Pandemics that hitch rides on cargo planes, trade wars that ripple through stock markets, and the delicate dance of diplomacy over resources. When Rome fretted over its silver draining eastward for silk, or China's Tang Dynasty taxed every bolt of cloth passing through its gates, they were wrestling with versions of the same dilemmas we face now. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes, and the Silk Road's verses still shape our geopolitical poetry. Yet its greatest gift wasn't material, but intellectual. The polymaths of Baghdad's House of Wisdom, translating Greek texts alongside Buddhist sutras, set the stage for the Renaissance. Paper, traveling westward from China, became the skin on which knowledge was tattooed across continents. Even the humble stirrup carried from Central Asia to Europe, revolutionized warfare and feudal societies. These weren't just products changing hands, they were sparks igniting revolutions in thought, power, and identity. The Silk Road proved that ideas, once set loose, refused to be caged by borders. So what does this mean for us? The next time you scroll through global news or tap a screen to order goods from across the planet, remember, you're living in the Silk Road's grandchild. Those ancient merchants and nomads haggling under desert stars were drafting the rules of a game we're still playing. The empires that flourished were those that adapted, like the Mongols, who turned protection into profit, or the Sogdians, who spoke 9 languages to broker deals. The ones that fell, they clung to walls instead of building bridges. As the camera pans out on this saga, we're left with a question not about the past, but the future. What invisible roads are we walking today that will shape tomorrow's empires? The digital highways of data, the orbital paths of satellites, the undersea cables humming with trillions of transactions, they are our Silk Roads now. And if history's any guide, the civilizations that thrive will be those that master not just the trade of goods, but the exchange of ideas. Before we close, we'd love to hear which historical crossroads fascinates you most. The Amber Road of Northern Europe, the Incan highway system. Drop your picks in the comments, and if you've enjoyed this ride through time, hit like, subscribe, and join us as we keep unraveling the threads that weave our world together. After all, every path has its secrets, and every secret, a story waiting to be told.